Well, good morning, White Flag. It is good to be with you again, and I am excited today to share with you some really exciting opportunities. And I want to begin today by going to one of my favorite passages in Luke chapter 15. So if you have your Bibles, I want you to open up to Luke chapter 15. And there we're going to look at really what I would describe as the heart of God. And it's always exciting to study the heart of God. And that's where we're going to lay a foundation with this morning is in Luke chapter 15. And so all of the passages that I'm going to read to you, I'm just going to read them to you. They won't be up on the side screen. We want to encourage you to bring your Bible or grab a Bible when you walk in. There's a Bible a rack on the wall back there you can use anytime you're walking into this room. Just return it on your way out. But I want you just to listen to these stories or follow along, but I don't want you to be distracted, so I'm going to just be reading them to you today. In Luke chapter 15, there's a bit of a context that gets us into the story. It's in the ministry of Jesus, and Luke is telling the story. And in verses 1 and 2, it gives us some interesting context. Here's what it says. It says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus." I think that's an interesting line. A lot of times people will talk about how Jesus would go to the bars and hang out with the bad people, when that's not really what Jesus would do. Here it tells us that the bad people would come up and hang around Jesus because they were interested in what he had to say. And so these gathering around him were the tax collectors and the sinners. And that's an interesting descriptive set of words by Luke. Tax collectors, they were the pariah of the community because they were, it would be like if you were taken over by another country and you had to pay taxes to them, your friends, working for the people who were oppressing you and collecting taxes from you. So these Jewish people would have to pay taxes to someone like Matthew, who was a tax collector, and then he would turn around and take that money and give it to the Romans. So they were not very popular. In fact, they were seen as horrible people. And then, of course, the other descriptive word was sinners. And so that would be used to describe anybody that was not living a life worthy of God, and that they would be thrown into that category. So tax collectors and sinners, the worst of all people, were hanging out with Jesus. And while this was taking place, in verse 2, it says the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, that means the religious, pompous people who thought they had it all figured out, they would mutter under their breath. They would kind of say things. And the things they were questioning was, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. They could not get their brain wrapped around the fact that Jesus, this person that was seen as a rabbi, a teacher, and was making these claims, was also spending time with tax collectors and sinners. And so as Jesus has the opportunity, he tells 3 stories back to back to back to try to communicate and make these religious people understand why he was spending time with the tax collectors and sinners. And so he tells 3 parables. Parables are made up stories. A lot of people are confused by Jesus's parables. They're just made up stories. They're not about real people. They're about situations and scenarios that will lead a person to make a conclusion about who God is. And so Jesus tells 3 back-to-back stories about lost things. And you're probably familiar with these stories, but I want to just read all the way through chapter 15 to lay a base for our topic today in our discussion. And so it begins in verse 3. It says, "Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose," once again, he's just making this up, "suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And then when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. And then he calls his friends and his neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep.' Well, Jesus says, 'I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent.'" Now, there's no such thing as 99 righteous people who don't need to repent, but what Jesus is trying to do here is make a point. They've got questions about why he's spending time with tax collectors and sinners. And Jesus just says, let's talk about sheep. You guys all understand sheep. And if you had 100, but one of them was lost, you would leave the 99 that are safe in the pen to go after the one. Why? because that one sheep is valuable. And if you found it, you would rejoice and you would call up your friends. Real simple story that everybody could understand. But then he moves to a second story. And now it's not an animal. This time it's an object. It's the parable of the lost coin. He says, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin. And in the same way, Jesus again is connecting the dots. In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Okay? He's made his point about a sheep. He's made his point about this coin. Everybody would search for that lost coin because there's value to that coin, even though it's only one out of the 10. And then he moves on to a more personal parable, one that's about a person, one that has more emotions. It's not about an animal or an object. It's about a son, a lost son. And in this story, it's probably the most famous of all three. You've probably heard this story 100 times, but let me again just read to you the passage and just listen to these words or follow along. In verse 11, Jesus continued and then said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. So there is a father, he's got 2 sons. Generally, the father will pass away and his estate will be split up between the 2 sons. But in this case, he's got one son that is so anxious to get his hands on the money, he basically goes up to his father and says, you're not dead yet, but I want what's coming to me anyway now. Think about that scenario. It's pretty bizarre. But then it says in verse 13, not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had and set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So the bottom dropped out of his pocketbook. At the same time, the bottom dropped out of the whole economy everywhere. Everybody was out, down and out. And he was really down and out because he was in a foreign land. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country. Basically, he made himself a slave. And then he was sent to the fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And here's the key verse, verse 17. When he came to his senses, and remember, Jesus is just making up this story about a hypothetical kid who leaves home. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I'm starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. So this guy has figured out how bad he has messed up. And he says he's going to go home and say to his father, make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, and here's a key part of the story, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. And this would have been a very strange thing for the listeners of Jesus' story to hear, because in their culture, if you decided to abandon your family like that and ask for your inheritance before the death of your father and then leave and squander it all, you didn't get the option of coming back. And if you did, your father would have brushed you off. Your father would have ignored you. Your father would have said, you're no longer a part of this family. But this father in the story runs and meets his son and hugs him. And then it says that in verse 21, it says, the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, against God, and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. He wasn't expecting this kind of response. His father said, for this son of mine was dead and now is alive again. He was lost, but now he is found. And so they began to celebrate. Now the story has a few more details, but that gets us to the place where you can kind of understand the theme. 3 different stories about 3 different lost things, all in response to some muttering and murmuring that was taking place by the Pharisees, saying, why in the world is this guy hanging out with tax collectors and sinners? The overriding message in this passage is that people are of great value to God. No matter who you are, no matter what you've done, all lives matter, if I can borrow a phrase from today's culture. All lives matter. But God is particularly concerned with those that are lost. It's not that he doesn't love the ones that are found. It's that he's particularly concerned about the ones that are lost. And he goes to great length to reach them. And that's what these stories were all about. He's not passive, he's active. That's why in all the stories that Jesus tells, the shepherd leaves the 99 to go after the one. The woman turns her house upside down to find the coin. The father runs out to meet the son, to hug the son, to celebrate that his lost son has been found. Why? Because lost people matter to God. And if they matter to God, they need to matter to us. And the way we know they matter to God is because God sent his one and only son, Jesus, to die for lost, sinful people. He made the first move on our behalf. The Pharisees could not make sense of this. They could not make sense of why Jesus was engaging sinners. And I want to tell you something as a transitional idea here. If you live your life with a focus on reaching lost people, people won't understand you either. They just won't. You know, White Flag has always been a church that has been focused on reaching out to lost people. I remember 7 years ago, 8 years ago, however long it was now, it's been when I first got here, I remember praying about our mission statement, our vision statement. Like, what were we going to hang our hat on? Like, all churches say they care about lost people, but few churches actually do anything to reach lost people. They become more like a country club, and they kind of, listen to the whims of their members, and whatever they want, they try to custom everything to their liking and keep them happy. And they're more about keeping people than reaching people. And when I got here, I kind of, changed a few things and made it very clear to everyone that we were going to be more focused on reaching people than keeping people. And you have to decide where you're at. And I needed to have a statement or a mission idea, a mission vision statement on what we would hang our hat on. I remember praying about that and processing and writing them all out. And as ideas would come to my head, I would say it into my phone. I would hit the memo button on my iPhone, and I would say different statements. And I still have the original statement when I finally landed on what our vision statement is, which is transforming lives by connecting people to Jesus, his word, and community. I really believe that we could transform lives if we reached lost people and didn't connect them to a personality, to a preacher, or to music, or to a building, but to Jesus, because Jesus has the power to change people. And so that's been our vision ever since, transforming lives by connecting people with Jesus, his word, and community. And we were so committed to that mission statement that I remember about 2 years in to my ministry here, I challenged our people to be so concerned about the lost that they would give money to help our church grow and reach the lost. And we laid out a challenge, and in that challenge, the people responded, and we collected right at $1 million, $1 million over and above the church's regular giving. And we were much smaller back then. When I first got here, the church was less people. It was about the amount of people in this room alone right now. We were right around 350 people on average every week. And of course, now we have 3 services. But back then, we were small. And so there weren't a lot of people, but the people gave, and we got close to $1 million. And in that vision, there was this little component that I added, that I challenged people in all the little brochures and all the speeches and all the challenges I made. And in that, there was this little caveat that in reaching the lost, one of the things that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to buy land. But at that time, we had no opportunity or way to buy land. And I said, I want to be in a position to where we have some money on hand in the bank so that if there is ever an opportunity, because I believe God will someday give it to us, we need to have that money set aside. And so we asked that we could, we shared that we would set aside $250,000 of the $1 million for a future land purchase, and we didn't really know what that looked like. Well, today I'm excited to tell you a story that connects our step of faith back then with a God-sized opportunity now. And so I've been teasing you guys and mentioning this idea about an opportunity to purchase some land. And today I want to share an incredible story with you. And so I've entitled this message, Land of Opportunity. And that's because for the last 7 or 8 years, when I look out my office window, I look out over a big piece of land that I refer to as the land of opportunity in my own heart and mind. And I've been praying for it for about 7 or 8 years. And I want you to visually be able to see what I'm going to be talking about today. And so let me show you this map and kind of describe some things. On this map that you see behind me, you've got a red box, a yellow box, and then, the surrounding area. This road down below is Telegraph. And the red box is our existing property. And let me just give you a little bit of indicator of our existing property. When I was being challenged to come here or invited to come here, one of the things everyone kept telling me is, man, we've got 30 acres of land. We've got 30 acres of land. And what I didn't really understand is we had 10 acres of usable land and we had 20 acres of unusable land. Okay, so the 10 acres that our property sits on, as you can see in this picture, there's a big building and a big parking lot. That's 10 acres that's completely maxed out. We then have 10 acres that's in a flood plain and 10 acres that's in a flood way. You can't see it on the middle screen. You can see a little hint of blue, but on the outside screens, you can see a little blue bar. Do you see that little blue bar at the top? That represents the Merrimack River. Can you see that? Give me a nod if you can see it. Okay, so that's the Merrimack River, and it just goes across that tree line. The floodway means there's going to be water flowing through on a moving current on a regular basis when the river swells, okay? And so a floodway you can't mess with because anything that you build will very likely be swept away with moving current. A floodplain is a little bit higher. When the river floods, it might spill over into the floodplain, but you're probably not going to have fast moving current. And you can build in the floodplain at your own risk, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. But you also have a right to raise the floodplain out of the floodplain, which you cannot do in a floodway. So that's just a little bit of a topography lesson for you today that I had to learn. Well, all that to say, it might look good from an aerial view, but basically it's really impossible or nearly impossible for us to build on the 20 acres that we have. So we've been landlocked on 10 with a lot of view, basically. But then to the south of us, so in this room it'd be that way, we've got this 30 acres of land represented in the yellow. And this 30 acres of land has been always something that I've looked at and coveted and thought, you know what, it would be really nice to have this for our church so that we could continue to grow. And we have made countless offers to our neighbors to buy this land. We have had countless meetings, countless phone calls. I have made very clear to them what we want to do. We've even brought in, third-party appraisers to have it appraised. We have been willing to pay what it appraised for. We have been willing to swap land for them to get this land. We have been willing to do really anything. And our neighbors haven't been very easy to kind of communicate with. It's kind of been a little bit sketchy. And so, after literally years and years and years of trying, recently they have always refused and never really wanted to sit down and lock that in. Recently, a big for sale sign went up on the property. And we're like, what is the deal? Why won't they sell it to us? And so we sat down with them again. We went over it all again. And basically, they put up the property for sale for $450,000 for this 30 acres that's next to us. And we had many discussions about, should we just pay that? Should we pay whatever it takes? Don't we want this? Don't we need this? All that prayer, thought had gone into it. But eventually, we just couldn't get them to really land on anything. And we just kept stepping back. And we thought we had an agreement of first right of refusal. Do you know what that means, first right of refusal? If you don't, just basically means we thought we had a pretty clear handshake deal that if someone were going to come in and buy it, that they would come to us and we would have the right to be able to say, someone offered you 450, we'll give you 460. We want that land. And so we thought we had that. Well, a couple of weeks ago, about a month and a half or two ago, on a Saturday night in our Saturday night service, somebody came up to me and told me, hey, did you hear that property next to us sold? I was like, are you kidding me? What? I mean, I was really angry. And I couldn't wait till Monday to come around because I was going to call our neighbors and say, in a Jesus way, what in the world is going on here? You know, we've had so many conversations. They allow us to use the land. We have a good relationship with our neighbors, so there wasn't any bad relationship. They let us use the land for fall family night, for parking at Christmas and Easter. I couldn't figure out what in the world was going on. And so I made that phone call. And when I called to ask why, I got a conversation that was pretty clear that they didn't want to talk to me and that the land had been sold and they weren't going to give me many details and that they had to do this rush deal and it was too hard to explain to me and they wanted to get off the phone. And so I was like, well, okay, so you sold it. Who did you sell it to? Will you tell me who you sold it to? And the guy said, well, I don't really know all the details, but I can tell you this. Yeah, we sold it to this guy named Larry. And Larry's an excavator. I'm like, okay, well, Larry who? And eventually he gives me the last name. He says, Larry Goodwin. Well, that didn't mean anything to me. And so I'm like, okay, so you sold it to somebody named Larry Goodwin and he's into excavating. The guy said, yeah. And I said, great. Well, and I said, well, have a great life. Been great having you as neighbors. I wish you the best. See you later. So I get off the phone and I am steaming. I am angry. I am frustrated. I have tried all these conversations. Our leadership team has met with them. Why did they do this? I was pretty angry and I turned to God and said, God, do you not want us to have this land? If you don't want us to have this land, I think you're making it very clear to us. I don't understand why this is happening. And if you know anything about me, I don't give up very easy. And so I felt like I was being told, not in some weird audible voice, but don't give up. And so I decided to get on the internet and literally start searching for Larry, the excavator, on the internet. So I'm searching. I don't have any information. I search and I search and I search and I search until I find a company that's not into excavating, but they were a construction company. And the president's name was Larry Goodwin. And this was a big company. It was called Goodwin Brothers Construction. It was a third generation company that many of you have probably heard about. And they're currently doing the Arch project right now. They do the MSD projects all over the place. They did the MSD project over here right by us at Rogers Elementary. This is a huge company, which all of a sudden makes me feel really powerless, right? So I get the number. I'm like, okay, I'm calling these people. So I called Goodwin Brothers Construction and I get, it's a cold call. I get the secretary. I'm like, could I speak to the president of your company? She's like, sure you can. Puts me to voicemail. And I leave the craziest voicemail you've ever heard. My voicemail basically went like this. Hi, Larry. You don't know me, and I don't even know if you're the right Larry, but if you happen to have bought some land, 30 acres on Telegraph Road, I'm your new neighbor. And I've got a big event called the Fall Family Night that we're going to be parking all over your land on. I hope so, and that was kind of my way in was, can you give me a call back? And I left that message really not expecting a phone call back. And to my shock, at 9:00 in the morning on the following day, Larry calls me and he says, yeah, I happen to be the right Larry. And so you're the pastor. Okay, great. Yeah. And so we had a little chit chat conversation where I said, yeah, Larry, I would love to talk to you about kind of what your plans are. And we've got these needs that we kind of park there sometime. And I wanted to have a meeting about continuing that. And he said to me, yeah, I'd be happy to tell you about my plans sometime. We'll have to get together. One of those like, we'll do lunch kind of things. And then he's a busy guy. He was in a hurry. He had to go. So I got off that phone thinking, man, I really wish I could have like nailed down a meeting, because this might be one of those situations where I never get a lunch, right? Well, to my surprise, 2 days later, Larry calls me about 7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, and says, hey, Paul, I'm going to be in your area. My grandkids having some, musical that I'm going to attend at a school near your area. Can I swing by and meet with you in your office in about 2 hours? And I was like, yep. So I got out of bed, I was asleep when he called me, and I got out. I was still in bed. I called 2 guys from our leadership team, and I said, hey guys, you need to like call in sick to work or whatever, but I need you in my office in less than 2 hours. Can you do that? And they said yes. And so we get together and we huddle up in my office, and we're kind of like, a little bit antsy, because this guy, after we did some research, is a pretty big deal, okay? Goodwin Brothers Construction is a really large organization. And here is the president is going to be coming in and meeting with me in my office. And so we're going to talk and pray about strategy for literally 15 minutes until he comes in. Because we have an objective here, and I'm not sure, I didn't go to school on how to work and negotiate land deals. So in this meeting, I had a guy that's pretty good at that stuff, a member of our church. And he said something very profound that kind of changed our mindset in the meeting. He said to me, hey, Paul, you need to just know something. You have no leveraging power with this guy. He doesn't need anything from you or us. So I would recommend that you not go about this like trying to strike a deal. You need to just tell him what you need and what your heart wants as a pastor and what you plan to do with this land. Tell him what the goal of our church is. Don't say anything else. And I was like, okay, I can go that route. I can do, I didn't know what to do, right? This all was happening really fast. And so Larry walks in. We pray. He walks in. We get done praying. We kind of wait for him. He walks in, and he sits down. And as he sits down, Larry just starts the conversation. Nicest guy in the world, just no ego, just the most humble guy in the world. He sits down and says, I would love to just tell you guys exactly what my plans are. And again, this is information we're wanting. And so he shares with us his plans and why he bought this land. So he says, here's the deal. He said, I built that, plant over there by Rogers several years ago, and I had spotted the land then, and I'm in the excavating business. And I was like, yeah, I know that. Yeah, you're Larry the excavator. And he goes, so I'm always moving very large quantities of dirt around, and I needed a location in South County. And so I first thought I will buy that land because it was at a price that was already a great deal. And I was like, really? Because we got it appraised. We were trying to figure that out too. And he said, and I had some information that this property was being fined because of all the dilapidated buildings. If you look at the property to the south of us, it is a nightmare of over here. I'll show you, like right here, this used to be a golf range. This was an old golf building. They golfed out that way. These are 2 swimming pools that if you were back here in the day, this was Party Central. Tony Chiodini, one of our elders, had like a birthday party here back in the 1800s. And, this is a swimming pool, or not a swimming pool. That's a race car track, which I took the tractor at Fall Family Night out there on the track and raced my tractor all the way around it. It was pretty cool. But anyway, another story, another day. A lot of old dilapidated buildings were being, they were being fined for it. And so Larry kind of said, I came in and I made an offer they couldn't refuse. And he's kind of connected with the city, and the city would love for Larry to own it because Larry's such a responsible, good businessman. And so he gets the property. He says, I go in and I just throw a number at them. They take it, but I make the promise that I will clean the entire property. I will take all the buildings down. I will collapse everything. I'll take all the boats and the trailers and all the trash and everything off the property and return it to its natural state. And, I gave him a good price, and I'm going to bring in dirt once I get the property cleaned, I'm going to raise it out of the floodplain up to Telegraph. That will double the value of the land. And then I'm going to build $375,000 condos from your church all the way down to the river. I'm like, oh, that's not my vision, So I'm listening, right? And we're all listening. And then he turns the conversation. He goes, so that's my plan. And he goes, I did all that. And I had I know exactly what I'm doing. And I imagine he's going to probably make millions on this deal. And so then he says a really weird thing. He says, why don't you go tell me about your plans? Tell me a little bit about your church. And he was really interested in our church. And he's like, what is White Flag? I've never heard of a church called White Flag. And I just like to know what you guys believe, because a lot of churches believe a lot of different things. And so I start telling them what our beliefs are, that we believe in Jesus, we believe in the Bible, we believe, in God's inspired word, that we're all sinners, that we are trying to reach lost people. And I start to share the vision of our church. And I tell them the history about how our church has grown from 350 people in the last 7 or 8 years to 1,200 people, and that we're out of space, and that we're out of parking, and that, all of these different things. And then he turns and says to me, well, Paul, we're not too different. And I'm like, oh yeah? We're not too different. He's like, yeah, I'm a Christian too. And I'm on the building committee team at my church. And I've been a member of a church my whole life, and I love the Lord, and I want to reach lost people. And, he was even talking about your neighbors. I've been trying to, I'm still, praying for your neighbors, the people that we just bought this land from, because I'd love to see them come to the Lord. And this guy starts to tell me what he believes, and he believes in what we believe. And then he says the sentence that made all of us have our jaws drop. He says, Paul, ever since you called me on that first day, I've been thinking. And he says, I'm starting to believe that the reason I bought that land was not to build condos, but was so I could sell it to you and you wouldn't have to, deal with these neighbors. So I'm going to sell it to you guys. He just says that. I haven't even made any kind of a, pitch or anything, which I was coming, trust me, And he says, so I want to sell it to you guys. And we're all looking at each other I was thinking, I am an awesome negotiator, But that's not what I was thinking. We were all straight-faced going, yeah, And he said, yeah, I just really, he goes, I don't need this. I thought I had plans, but it looks like God has other plans. And so why don't we strike an agreement? I'm like, well, what's the agreement? And here's what he says. He says, I'm going to tell you what I paid for it, and I've made this commitment to the city that I will clean all the property. So I don't want to make any profit at all. I just want to sell it to you for what I got it for, which, he got it for a great price. And I'm going to clean all the land. I'm going to sell it to you for I got $375,000 into it. I'm thinking, how did you get it for $375,000? He goes, I'm going to clean off all the land, and then I want to strike a deal with you where my company has exclusive dumping rights. I want to go ahead and bring in all the dirt. That will benefit me, but I'll just raise all of your land up out of the floodplain. Now, I don't know if you know how much that might be, but that's a pretty expensive deal. He goes, and so as I get projects and our company gets projects, we're going to come in and we're just going to develop this out up to Telegraph. And we're not going to back up a truck and dump dirt. He said, I think the phrase he used was something like geo-track it, compact it, something, so that it's ready for building. And that won't be overnight, but we'll start wherever you want and we'll move out as you need to build. And so I want to do all that because I share the same vision as you do. And I want to reach lost people. So at this point, we're sitting there going, we cannot even get our brains wrapped around what's happening in this deal. And, there's only one way to explain it. We had tried to buy. We had, for literally the last 7 to 8 years, we have had all these conversations. We even raised money to do it. We put that money aside. We were in all these different, conversations that just kept going to a dead end. And then the property sells to someone that we've never met and have no relationship with. And within 1 week, that guy's in my office for two meetings he came to my office for. I'm in the truck with him. He's driving around talking about all the different things that he thinks we can do, giving us great advice because this guy's super well connected. And basically, we have a contract on paper. It's actually, I have not got it yet. And I don't do that stuff. Our trustees do all that stuff, but it's on his desk right now and it's coming to us. And this is a locked in deal and it can only be described as a God thing. Absolutely a God thing. You can't make this stuff up. Yeah. Now, let me quickly tell you why this is a good thing, in case you don't know. So a couple of things about why this land is good for White Flag. Number one, it meets an immediate need for additional parking. You may not know this, or you may know this very well, but right now, currently, the last 2 weeks, I wasn't here last week, I was out of town, but the 2 weeks before that, we had 2 parking spots open on one weekend and 4 spots open on the other. That's it in our whole parking lot. And that is on a normal weekend. And every Easter, every Christmas, every special event, we literally have to go borrow parking lots, park in fields, and pay for shuttles and all that kind of stuff just to get people in. So we're long past a need for expanding parking, and there's no more areas to park on this property. So it immediately helps us with that. Number two, it protects us from unpredictable neighbors. To say we've had unpredictable neighbors would be an understatement. I mean, we've got a property where there's vandalism, where there's all kinds of, trucks and stuff being brought in and left, and then people break into the property. One year they lit on fire the trucks and the fire departments had to come out, and there's no control over that property. And if you notice here at White Flag, we like to do things nice, clean, professional, and crisp. That's why when you pull on our parking lot, everything's in place, and then this whole property next to us is like the dead end of Oakville. Well, my vision is that we White Flag that whole thing. I don't know what we would call it, but and that stuff starts to be the nicest area of Oakville, where people say that's where we want to go. That's where families want to go. That's where there's a big, by the way, this is a ginormous, if that's a word, pond right here that has been blocked up by beavers. But I saw an aerial picture of that. How many of you were around here in Oakville like 20 years ago when that was like the happening spot? Raise your hand. I mean, this used to be like a beautiful piece of property that has just been let go. I would love to see that come to life. And then we control our neighbors, because we own the property. There were several people coming in to buy, and one of them was going to put a recycling plant next to us. And so we were like, no. We didn't know one person was going to put a horse farm, and that would have been nice, I guess. I could have looked at horses. But I would rather it be used to reach lost people. And so we will control that. Number three, it allows us to expand our facilities. We never were intended to be in a gymnasium forever. And so, when this church was built, I think the vision was for about 500. We run about 1,200 on the weekends. So we need to expand. And when we do that, that will all play out as we continue to pray about it. But we've never really had the option to build the way we need to build. And this land will provide that. Number four, it adds property value immediately. When you add 30 acres to your ownership, right next to the current 30 that you own, the property value goes up. It's an asset. It has immediate built-in equity just with the land being cleaned and taken care of. When you raise the level up to Telegraph, it is going to double the value of the land. It's an asset. We're not just throwing money out the window. It's something that has value. And by the way, if you go in any direction, a half a block or two, you'll run into houses that cost more on a little quarter of an acre than what we will be paying for 30 acres of land. So it's just an absolute blessing from the Lord. And then fifth, it becomes, an incredible resource for events. I mean, think about sports camp, how many kids that we have. We have like 500 to 600 kids that show up for sports camp that we offer to the community for free. And guess what? We don't have enough room here. You know what we do every year for sports camp? We rent buses, we put them on buses, and we take them to fields on other people's property, you know? And now, sports camp, we'll have some room to develop. Fall family night, every year, we borrow only this part of the property. We borrow this section right here, and we parked here and here. And you know what happened? We parked 310 cars in that spot this year for Fall Family. Now we've got an additional, Fall Family expands, all kinds of cool stuff and other things that we don't even know about yet that God hasn't laid on our hearts. This land is good for White Flag. I don't have to sell it. I don't have to manipulate. It's just flat out a God thing, and I couldn't be more excited. So let me give you the invitation to participate. Let me tell you the numbers and explain how this is all going to go down. So here are the numbers. We tell you everything exactly how it is here at White Flag. So here's a little chart for you. The land, $375,000. We already have set aside $250,000, which a lot of people thought was goofy for me to say 8 years ago. And now I'm feeling pretty good about the fact that we set that aside and we've not touched it. So if you gave to Chasing Victory like I did, we were thinking about the future, and the future is now. So we got 250 sitting in the bank. That leaves 125,000. Well, once we get the land, there's still work to be done. I mean, we need to immediately put in a parking lot, and it gets a little bit confusing, and we don't know all the plans because this is happening fast, but the reality is we don't want to build a permanent parking lot that in 2 years we're going to tear out to put in a bigger building. So, we've got to do some temporary parking, some roads, some signage, some fences and gates and things like that so that we can start to improve that property in the meantime. That's going to land somewhere. I mean, one parking lot is $250,000 if we pave it. It's extremely expensive. That takes us to a total back up to 375. Does that make sense? Everybody give me a nod if you get that. So, we have a need for $375,000, and I'm coming to you today and I'm asking you to provide that so that we can do this. No bones about it. I'm going to give everything I can possibly give as an individual and as a family, and I hope that you will as well. I'm not going to beg you. If you don't want to give, don't give. No one's going to come to your door. You're not going to get some letter begging you. Look, here's the deal. At White Flag, we've been talking about, how to be White Flag strong and how to give generously. If you are excited about reaching lost people, if you're excited about participating in a God thing, then get involved. If you aren't and you don't want to and you feel uncomfortable about it, or you're new here, or you feel like you went to a church somewhere 10 years ago that talked about money, so you're one of those people that say all churches ever do is talk about money, you get a pass. Nobody's going to ask you for anything. But if you want to get involved, I invite you to get involved. The people that are excited and think this is a cool thing will get involved. And so that's all I have to say about that. But let me tell you the opportunities that you'll have to give. Here they are. There's going to be 3. I thought, you know what? This is just sprung up on me. I need to give immediately, but I need to save up and give later. And so we planned 3 giving opportunities. I just picked 3 random dates that I thought would be easy to remember. Number 1, the Christmas offering that we do every year on the weekend of the 19th and 20th when we have the little manger up here and your families and your kids come up and put money in the manger. That end of the year giving project that we do every year will be the first opportunity for you to give. To give you a little bit of perspective, the largest offering we've ever received on that weekend is right at $28,000, 28 to 30. I think it was 28,000. So, I'm hoping that you'll double or triple whatever you would normally do because this is an unusual opportunity for us. But I don't want you just to give one. I want you to plan to give. I'm going to give at all 3 of these offerings myself. Valentine's weekend, I thought, hey, everybody's going to be buying chocolate and roses, trying to convince their, spouse that they love them. And why not use that as you do love them, not convince them that you love them. I'm very romantic, My anniversary is on February 10th, so I lucked out big time. We don't even celebrate Valentine's Day because our anniversary is right there. So we do it all together. This year it'll be 21 years. Anyway, Valentine's weekend will be February 13th and 14th, and we're going to have a special offering then. And if that'll give you some time to save up and give to that again. And then I thought, tax weekend is April. Everyone's got to pay their taxes by April 15th. You might think of this as the tax refund offering. Plan, maybe, it's just a suggestion. If you're getting something back as a refund, you might, save that up. And then we're going to take up an offering on April 16th and 17th. Is it possible for us not to spend a ton of money on a consultant and brochures and have 30 meetings about this? Could we just raise $375,000 so this church could keep moving forward in a church of 1,200? I think the answer is absolutely yes. If you will make a sacrifice, if you will give to this in a way that is joyful and cheerful. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. Please hear that. And you don't have to say anything about it to anyone. But here's what I would end with and challenge you with. There were people years ago at this church that didn't know most of you in this room. Last night in the Saturday night service, I could spot 10 people in the entire room. I actually counted them. I counted them out loud, and this room's this audience a little bit bigger than our Saturday night crowd, so I'm not gonna do it. But I can see some folks in here that have been around. And when this church was small and they didn't have much, they sacrificed for a bunch of people that they didn't know yet. And they built this facility. And they gave to Chasing Victory. And they were giving with the idea that, God has blessed me. My family has been blessed at this church. I would love for other people to experience God in the same way. I would love for other people to have their marriage healed, for other people to join a small group, for other people to have their kids baptized at this church and grow up knowing the Lord. They had been blessed, and so they thought of you. And now when I look around this room, the majority of you have been, new members to this church in the last 5 or 6 years. And so a sacrifice was made so that this church could reach you. And now I'm asking, if it has impacted your life, that you make a sacrifice for people that you don't know. And I'm telling you, in 5 years from now, we're probably going to be sitting in a different building on this property. We'll probably be running 3,000 or 4,000 people. You'll probably feel like the church is so big, but I will remind you that the goal of the church is to grow. Not become a country club of 500 people so that it's small and you're comfortable. I always say you only need 1 or 2, 3, 4 friends. You don't need 500 friends, and you don't need 1,000 friends, and you don't need 5,000. A church is never too big if you're connected and you're involved in a small group. You always have a little small church. And so we're going to get bigger because we believe that we can't just look at all you guys and celebrate and go, woo, we've got the 99. There is a lost person out there that we need to reach. And we are completely committed to it. Now, it's not going to make sense to everyone if you choose to go a little bit light on Christmas and instead give to this project, or if you take your entire tax return and you give it to the church. People will wonder why you didn't go buy an ATV, or why you didn't buy a new car, or why you didn't, do Christmas lights this year for $300 on your, like all my neighbors wonder about, we look like the Bah Humbug house in our neighborhood. I'm always like, Anyway, are they going to think you're weird? Are they going to think you're strange? Absolutely. It's not going to make sense to everyone else, but it has to make sense to you. This is a worthy investment. This is a good thing. Lost people matter to God, and they should matter to us. And so I invite you to participate in this land of opportunity, all right? And I hope that you'll pray about it. I'm so excited, I can't even tell you, but I hope that you get as excited as I am, all right? So let me close with a word of prayer, and then we're out of here. Father, I just thank you for allowing me to share this story, and you get all the glory and all the credit, because we were so smart that for 8 years we couldn't pull off anything. And in literally one phone call, you directed us to an individual, and then you changed his heart to change his decisions and motives. And I'm just so thankful that such a godly man like Larry Goodwin, a man who has proven, I've heard so many stories about this guy, about how much he loves the Lord and what a great businessman he is, and how good he is to his employees, and how good he is to the city. And the fact that you led all this together, we give you all the credit. We see this with your hand on it, and that's why we're so confident that we need to move forward and do this. And so I just pray For the people that are listening to this with a skeptical heart, thinking, how can I get out of not participating? That you would just set them free and let them not worry about it. But that at the same time, the people that are in this room that are excited about giving and being a part of such a cool thing will give generously. I pray that you'll do that in my heart and my family and everyone else in this room as well. So we thank you for this time. We thank you for your word. It's in your son's name. Everybody says, amen. God bless you guys.